Gordon and Thomas tried their best to recover from what they learned at the old mines. But try as they might, it kept coming back. The other engines didn't know what was the matter. The two engines didn't dare tell them. Either they wouldn't be believed or they feared the other engines would never look at them the same way again. Thomas and Gordon often slept at the junction. The two comforted each other.
How are you managing?
Not very well. I was late twice today. My crew understood, but the passengers were cross. I can't get these thoughts of that night out of my head, Gordon.
I know, Thomas, I know. Neither can I. This isn't going to go away for a long time. But no matter what happens, I'll always be by your side.
You promise, Gordon.
I promise.
The two smiled before they slowly dozed into a deep sleep. That night, Thomas had a dream. He dreamt that he was puffing down an old but familiar line. By the time he reached the end of the line, he froze in horror.
Oh no, not here.
Slowly against his will, Thomas moved closer and closer to the giant chasm. Thomas had his eyes shut tight. He didn't want to look. But after a while, Thomas opened one of his eyes. He cautiously looked down. He gasped in shock. The hole in the ground was completely empty. The rusted shells that he saw that night were gone. Suddenly Thomas felt a bump from behind. Thomas woke up in alarm, shaking all over. A yawning could be heard.
Thomas, what's wrong? Are you all right?
Thomas didn't say anything. He couldn't speak. He puffed out of the shed, leaving behind a worried Gordon. Thomas was a wreck throughout the day. He was constantly late with his trains and couldn't concentrate. All the time he kept thinking about his dream, the shells, and what really happened.
It's all my fault. I caused this. I foolishly went past that sign, and now I've put not only myself through this torment, but Gordon as well.
Eventually, Thomas was ordered to be placed in the sheds. Until further notice, Percy and Toby took in turns to look after Thomas' work. The two engines were worried for their friend. Night had fallen at the junction. Thomas was dozing when suddenly he heard something. It was faint at first, but eventually the sound grew louder. The sound of rusty wheels. It creaked and groaned as it grew louder and louder. What was odd was that Thomas couldn't hear the sound of an engine, no puffing. This only made Thomas feel sick in the boiler when he heard a whistle. It was distorted and wonky. But that wasn't the worst part. Thomas knew who the whistle belonged to. At the moment, Thomas thought he could make out the figure of an engine rolling through the station. It stopped on the points to the shed. It then moved again, slowly and slowly rolling towards Thomas. 6 small wheels, a short stumpy boiler, a short stumpy funnel, a short, stumpy dome, and a rusted, dirtied, scratched number 1 on its sides. The shell stood in front of Thomas. The lack of a smoke box door only made Thomas even more afraid. A large piece from its tank fell off onto the track. The shell then charged towards Thomas, shoving him through the shed and onto the main line. Thomas shrieked and screamed for help. They raced down the main line, through stations and over bridges, then eventually through Gordon's Hill, without stopping. Thomas didn't dare look at the shell directly, but could have sworn that its face was trying to fall. They raced through the station at the bottom of the hill. Suddenly Thomas felt a jolt, and then without knowing, Thomas burst through the buffers and came off the tracks. He lay there dazed and confused. Thomas began to black out. But the last thing he saw was the sight of a large rusty engine puffing next to his form shell.